we're going to be doing in this video is starting to look at monopoly. Particularly this one focuses on the characteristics, types of monopoly, and it will go into a little bit more detail on natural monopoly. So what is a monopoly? Well, mono is Greek for one, a monocycle has only one wheel. So a monopoly is a market structure where there is only one player, a single seller, selling something that's completely unique. So do not talk about competition if you get a question about monopoly. The firm is exactly the same as the market. It has 100% market share. Now, just like perfect competition, it's a theoretical market structure because there is no firm in the world that has literally 100% market share. There are some near examples of monopoly. For example, globally, 88% nearly of operating systems for desktops are Windows. If you're watching this on a desktop, I could have a reasonably safe bet that you're watching it on a Windows environment. If we take a national market, if you look at the operating system market on mobiles in Brazil, you can see that 95% of them nearly run on Androids. Only 4.3% Apple/iOS based systems. And finally, your local water supply, there's a fair chance that 99.9% of the people who are at your school or college, including the staff, use the same local water supply for reasons that we're going to get into a bit later on this video. So let's look at how you can actually use monopoly in a question or a term that you can use. Well, the most important thing is if you get a question about monopoly, you are talking about an economic monopoly or a pure monopoly. That's a firm with 100% of the market. Do not talk about competition. If you see a firm with more than 40% market share, you can impress the examiners by talking about a dominant monopoly. You must, however, state dominant monopoly. So if you look at a Competition and Markets Authority report, you will occasionally see reference to a dominant monopoly. This firm can dominate the market in their view because they have such a big market share. An example would be the subscription video on demand market, where Netflix in the UK have 61% market share. They are a dominant monopoly in that market. More common in questions is a legal monopoly. For a firm to have a legal monopoly, it must have at least 25% market share. For example, Tesco's and British Gas both have just over a quarter market share in their respective markets, so they are legal monopolies. Why legal? Well, it's that point at which the competition authorities might start to get concerned. It's a trigger for action, for example, by the Competition and Markets Authority. We look at a natural monopoly later on in this video. So a natural monopoly, as the name implies, is one where monopoly is the natural outcome in this market. A term that you can use associated with monopoly is monopoly power. Most firms, in fact, any firm that is not in perfect competition has some sort of monopoly power. It could raise its price and not lose all of its customers. So, for example, if your school or college suddenly decided to take an extra £1 from you, I'm willing to bet that you'd pay it rather than have to move school or college. So a reasonable question might be, how on earth do monopolies form? How are they able to maintain their monopoly power position? Well, one way is by having a patent or a copyright. So that prevents others from making or using or selling your product. Now, the idea behind that is that it gives the inventor the opportunity to claw back some of the costs in making that invention, but it's short term. So they have to publish the patent, which means that others know what that patent is, and as soon as that term that the patent runs for disappears, others can then steam in and copy the market. So it gives short-term protection to encourage innovation in the economy. There are other statutory barriers. For example, you couldn't just set up a broadcasting station. You need permission from the government to do that. You need to get a license. There's only one company allowed to run trains up the west coast of Britain. And there's only one national lottery. So sometimes the government comes in. If an industry is nationalised, it will have protection as well against competition. Some industries have massive startup costs that might prevent others from moving in, particularly if those costs are sunk. That could create a particular barrier to entry. Similarly, economies of scale. The existing firm has these, new firms don't, so they're going to find it difficult to break in. These are regarded as innocent barriers to entry, i.e. there's not much the government could do about it, or there's not much the government would want to do about it, because they naturally occur in a particular industry. At the other end, firms can put up strategic barriers to keep others out. One would be a strong brand image. You'll know the colours associated with Coca-Cola. Now that creates a tremendous barrier for others to try to push through, because they will have to spend money on marketing to try to overcome that. Similarly, firms might adopt aggressive pricing tactics to keep others out, or strong marketing tactics. Now those are not innocent barriers to entry. Those are there because the firms have deliberately constructed them, and that's something that maybe the competition authorities can try to act on. So now we're going to do a case study of a natural monopoly, and we're going to be looking at the water market, specifically Thames Water Limited. I was actually quite surprised that it's a limited company and not a PLC, but it is. It's the company that provides water to London, has a customer base of 15 million people. That's over a quarter of the total UK population. There are 30 reservoirs, 13 of which are in the Lee Valley that you can see on the map, and it maintains the Thames water ring that basically supplies water all over London. If you look at the costs involved, you can see absolutely massive fixed costs. Look at the size of those reservoirs in a, the cost of that in a place like London, massive, multi billions. In addition, in order to get water to your house, they have to supply water to your street. And again, the cost of doing that, remember, they have to dig up the roads, they have to then plant those pipes. And in the event of the company failing, those costs cannot be recovered at all. It would not be worth their while to dig up the streets again to retrieve those pipes. So those are examples of sunk costs, which are irrecoverable costs. And if we compare that with the cost of getting the water from the street to your house, that requires a relatively small pipe. So the variable costs or marginal costs to supply the extra household are negligible. What's the result of this? Well, if virtually all your costs are fixed, then your total costs are virtually the same as your fixed costs. So your average total costs are virtually the same as your average fixed costs. So if you look at that diagram on the left-hand side, you can see the long-run average cost curve is shaped exactly the same as the average fixed cost curve. So what are the implications of this? Well, if a rival tried to set up and steal some of the market from Thames Water, well, first of all, they'd find it horrendously difficult. Do you think that they'd get permission from all the local authorities to dig up streets, to plant additional pipes when those streets have already got pipes? And in addition, of course, would they want to do it? Because those costs would be sunk costs, and they would know that. They would know that if they failed, they would not be able to get those costs back. So what would Thames do while this new rival was trying to get in place? Well, Thames have got cost advantages. Have a look at that average fixed cost curve. So all they'd do is they'd reduce the price to customers that this new firm was trying to nick, and they'd be able to effectively price the new firm out of the market. So the rival wouldn't even bother. Other examples of natural monopolies are gas, electricity, or the broadband network. The infrastructure to provide all those things is absolutely massive. So why is Thames not a pure monopoly? Well, there'll be some people on the margins who might have a choice of water suppliers. And similarly, there's some things that Thames supply water for. If you look at the actual uses, for example, drinking water, where there are some rivals, but frankly, there isn't a rival for things like the water that goes into your loo. You're not going to put your natural water that you buy from shops down there. So it's a pretty good example. So that's really all we want to talk about when we talk about the definitions and the types of monopoly.